All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Prakalpa. I'm one of the co-founders of Atlan. But before we talk about Atlan, today we are here to talk about Data Governance 3.0. So before I start, real show of hands, how many people here actually know what data governance is? Like, you truly get it. That's what I thought. So data governance is pretty misunderstood in the world that we live in. So I like to lurk around these data practitioners Slack communities, and I basically went and found some screenshots on why it is. So myth number one, recently I did a poll on LinkedIn, and I said, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word data governance? And most people said, rules and policies. Myth number two, data governance is a data security or data protection problem. Myth number three, data governance slows you down. So constant challenge as data practitioners is like, this seems like this top-down bureaucratic process that's basically going to make our work a lot harder. Most people see data governance as a monarchy. It's bureaucratic, it's ineffective, and frankly, mostly they fail. But the reality is actually most people don't even know what data governance actually is. So what you see on the screen, this is a screenshot from a survey in the start of the year in a Slack community. What are the top layers of the modern data stack that you don't understand? And guess who won? Data governance. But my real favorite is there's actually a online portal of sorts where people write letters to this person who claims to be a data governance, I guess, problem solver called Laura. And so you'll see this message that says, Dear Laura, recently our data governance leader quit. Apparently, she decided that living in Costa Rica and teaching yoga was more fun and interesting than leading a data governance effort. But I digress. Now I have an empty hole where my data governance leader used to be, and within a few weeks, the whole thing has fallen apart. Nobody seems to know exactly what's happening, what we should be doing, and most disturbingly, what the value of the program was in the first place. How many people here relate with something like this about data governance? Okay, I can see some hands. So I'll admit, for a while, I personally had no idea what data governance was. I started my career as a data practitioner. I founded a company that did a lot of work in the data science for social good space. We used to essentially try and help data science for social good. So what you see on the screen, at one point processing data for 1.5 billion data points about citizens, or billions of pixels of satellite imagery a day, which all on the outside seems really cool. But on the inside, it was not fun at all. So what you see on the screen, these are real-life Slack messages from our team. What does this column name actually mean? Which data set should I use for this analysis? Can I trust this dashboard? The dreaded question, that number doesn't look right. One morning, I got a call from the cabinet minister of India. And he said, Prakalpa, the number on this dashboard doesn't look right. It was 8 in the morning. I opened up my laptop, and I'm frantically looking at the dashboard, hoping that something's not wrong. There was a 2x spike in the dashboard in a day, which clearly didn't make sense. But there was nothing I could do at that point. So I said, sir, I'll call you back. And then I called my project manager, who called my analyst, who called my data engineer, who pulled out audit logs. And it took us, 8 hours, 4 people, to even figure out what went wrong. And in that moment, our team lost agility. It took us far too many people and far too much time to figure out what went wrong. But most importantly, trust broke in our team. At that moment, the hard-earned trust that I'd built with my business stakeholder broke just in that 1 second, not because something went wrong, but because I did not know how to solve that problem. I did not know how to tell him what went wrong. And at some level, my trust on my data engineer broke as well. I was like, did the pipeline really break, or is my data engineer not doing his job? A few days later, the analyst on the project quit. He was our most senior analyst. He was the only one who knew everything about our data. And we had to deliver the project in basically a week. And that morning, I remember first I went, like for 3 hours, I cajoled him. I was like, please do not leave. If you leave this project, there's no way that I can deliver this project to our client. I couldn't convince him. I went up to the terrace that morning, and I cried. I cried for 3 hours, because I had no idea how I was going to deliver this project, because all the knowledge about our data had just walked away with this one person. So the next morning, I woke up, and I was like, we cannot be in this situation ever again. So we got our data team together, and we started what we called a assembly line project. So we basically said, what is everything that's broken in our data team, and how can we ensure that we're not going to be in this situation again? We first actually tried to buy a solution. So we failed 3 times in doing that, and we were eventually forced to build. So over 2 years, we built tooling that made our team 6 times more agile. We went on to do things like we built India's national data platform, which the Prime Minister himself uses. But what was really cool about that project was it was built by an 8-member team in 12 months. It was also one of the fastest of its kind globally. And so we said, hey, these tools have helped our data team become so much more effective. Is there a way we can actually help other data teams around the world? And that's how Atlan, the company that I run today, was born. And so we started then talking to data teams and demoing the product. And after one of these demo sessions, someone told me, oh, you guys are like a modern data governance solution. And I was like, mind blown. Like, I was like, oh, OK, what the hell is data governance? So that is really how I started my journey with data governance. As data practitioners, you don't learn about data governance, right? Like, you mostly want to fix problems with data. Data governance, however, has a ton of negative bias that's associated with it. And it's time that it's changing. And the reason it's changing is because our world is changing. People today expect purpose and autonomy in their work. There was a time where data governance could be about rules and policies. It could be top-down. You could be a large bank, and you could say, hey, you know what? I need you to go do X, Y, Z, and that was OK. But the world that we live in, you know what? People actually care about their work and the purpose of their work, and those things matter to data practitioners today. Second, consumerization of the enterprise, right? I'm sure every single, actually, show of hands, who uses Netflix? Who uses Google Maps, Uber, Lyft, right? We all have been born into this world where we expect a certain quality of software, and we expect software to work in a certain way. Nobody wants to go through a training program to use software, right? And it's like, as we think about adoption in our daily lives and for the tools in our enterprise, how do you build stuff that people actually just use without having to go through a complex training program? Automation, this one's I'm not even going to go and talk about this, right? Like, we all use, we have like devices in our house today that are, turning on the coffee machine at 8 in the morning when we wake up, right? Like, there is a ton of automation, again, in our personal lives. How do we build that into like our work lives? And fourth, we're starting to move to a world where we're going from protecting data to how do we start getting value from data. So what should, in this new world that we live in, what should data governance look like? My favorite lessons always come from history. And something I've been a student of is actually studying governance and how governance has evolved over time. So the way I think about governance is there were actually 3 eras of governance. The first, many, many years ago, was the monarchy, right? There was the one king and queen, and they would make all the decisions for all of the population. And then sometime, I think about 4 or 5 centuries ago, we moved to the aristocracy, which was a group of elites, the rule by the few, who would basically take some input from above and then start making decisions for the rest of the world. And then we moved to the world that we know today, the democracy, right? Where the many get a say in the policies that are governing them. Data governance is going through a similar evolution. So I think about data governance in 3 eras. The first is the 1990 to 2010 era, which really was fundamentally like a monarchy. Like it used to be typically built for IT users or data inventory of sorts. It was fundamentally just about one rule being enforced downstream. Data governance 2.0 era started, I think now about 15 years ago, where we introduced the concept of something called a data steward. Right? If you think about a data steward, and you think about the parallels to the aristocracy, a group of people that were responsible for the quality of the data and the trust of the data inside our orgs. And now, in the last few years, as the modern data stack goes mainstream, we're really in the 3.0 era of data governance. And the best parallel to think about this is, what does this 3.0 era, which should traditionally, as you think about history, look like a democracy, what should this look like? I'm not going to claim to have the answers to all these questions. And so my goal is actually to just share some overall principles in thinking about, as we think about the world of 3.0 data governance, what does that actually mean for us as practitioners on a daily basis in our organizations? To me, it comes down to 4 broad principles that I've learned over time as we've worked with customers at Atlan. The first, build a data community and not a data governance program. Going back to purpose is really important. So one of the things that we've started seeing teams do is actually start by saying, what do we want our data culture to look like in 12 months? So what you see on the screen, this is actually the North Star that was created by one of the largest logistics delivery providers around the world. And they basically brought their entire team together and they said, what do we want our team to look like in 12 months? And they said, we want to become a fully self-organized team. Where all your data, learnings, experiments, projects, they should be reusable, transparent, easily accessible. We want to create an environment of trust in data and the decisions that you drive. And we truly want to build a collaboration-first culture where every single person on our team feels empowered. And there's fundamental diversity in the team. And that became the North Star for the community. Communities are built are purpose-driven. Communities are never built because someone decided that they want to build a community. Communities are always purpose-driven. And that was the one core learning that we've seen. Start with the purpose, bring the team together to say, hey, what's the why? From there, the other thing that we've seen is this transition that's starting to happen from going back to purpose, from practitioners shipping services to really start thinking about shipping data products. I know there's been a lot of talk about data products in the last couple of years in the modern data stack. But to unpack the hype, right? I think the best, again, going back in history, what is really the difference between services and product? If you think about services, like traditional services just in the world, right? Services is about, you typically start at a specific client problem. And you engage a team to fully solve and implement the problem. And then you get paid by the client for the implementation of that whatever solution, right? And then if you think about a product is not about one customer. A product is about building a solution that can be reused by multiple customers or users to solve a single problem. And eventually, you mostly start getting paid by your customers for usage of the product. So it's not just about delivery, it's actually about usage and adoption. Success criteria, as you think about this product mindset, changes a lot, right? So as you think about, let's bring that same paradigm of services versus product to data services and data product. If you're a data service team, your eventual success criteria is, did we deliver on time? Did we implement? Successful implementation is the criteria. As you start thinking about a data product, your success criteria is, did it solve the problem for my end users? Do they use it regularly? Reusability. You can never build a product for one person. It needs to be reusable and reproducible and scalable. You build one, and you build for use by many, right? Requirements and scoping changes, because in data services, you build what customers ask you to build, versus in product, you try and understand commonality across problems and say, hey, here's my customer base, here's what I build. And most importantly, if you were thinking about a real-life product, would you ever actually be able to ship a product and say, hey, I don't really care if my users use it? Will a great product not have documentation associated with it? Will a great product not have reliability metrics that are associated with it? Right? And so as you start thinking about that from a purpose perspective, as teams start thinking about their day-to-day role, as it's not enough to just ship this one solution to my end consumers and start saying, hey, how do we build this in a way that it's actually a reusable, reproducible assets? It goes back into creating communities and purpose inside organizations. Reusability, reproducibility, well-documented, accessible, scalable, and most importantly, focused on impact and not inputs. So that's the first real principle as we think about data governance 3.0. It goes from being governance top-down to communities that start thinking about themselves as delivering data products. Second, collaboration, not control. This was actually a tweet from Josh Wills that blew up on Twitter sometime, and it basically said, I have no desire ever to visit a third website to just browse the metadata. Could you just integrate metadata info into my BI tool so I can see it while I'm doing my queries? The reality is that as you think about building reusability and reproducibility and trust in your ecosystems, it's about engaging a ton of users. And so far, as we've thought about data governance 1.0 and 2.0, it's been very top-down. Here's the software. Go do this. Here's a steward. I'm going to appoint you. Here's your counsel. Here's like, users don't want that. Users just want tools that integrate into their daily workflows. And so if you adopt that paradigm, why can't you start thinking about, for example, activating your metadata and taking it back into the daily workflows of teams? So what you see on the screen is a direct Slack plugin. So every time you have a conversation in Slack, when someone says, I'm sure everyone, how many people actually have some Slack channel, Teams channel, where people ask questions about data? How many people spend a ton of their time answering these questions about data? That's context getting created right there in that conversation, right? And all you have to figure out is how to embed software into that conversation so that it's not a one-off service, but it's actually things that are getting reusable and reproducible for the rest of the org. So, Slack bots that automatically say, when someone says, what is annual recurring revenue? Your Slack bot can say, here's what annual recurring revenue is. If people have a conversation about that, that context comes back and actually enriches the way you think about annual recurring revenue and the single source of truth in your organizations. Another element that we've seen as we think about this paradigm of activating metadata is, again, like let's pick BI tools, right? Like constant question, going back to the number on the dashboard is broken, right? You can bring context from your pipelines. You can bring context about who owns this, all of that back into your BI workflows itself. So what you're seeing on the screen, this is a Chrome widget that sits on top of any BI tool and says, here's who owns it. Here are the business terms. The pipeline that's connected to it is updated. It's verified. You can use it. So again, think about this paradigm from that perspective when the cabinet minister called me. He wouldn't have had to call me. He would have right then and there seen his dashboard, and we would have known that the issue, which by the way was that the pipeline actually broke upstream, and they sent us cumulative data and for that one day instead of daily data, which basically meant there was a 2x spike. That would actually be here live, available to the end user, reducing that data service request, but building trust right then and there. Third, automate wherever possible. Today, there's a ton that's possible with automation. So again, some examples. We actually found that through your SQL query history, so this was a customer that actually used SQL query history to deploy a bot. to understand who's querying our data the most and use that to auto-assign experts to their data asset. Right? There are elements of custom classifications where you can say, hey, you know what, I have this HIPAA compliance, and here are the domains and keywords that are most relevant for this. Let me build a custom classification to be able to drive this. So the one thing as we think about automation that we've learned is that automation is not, there's a lot of talk about machine learning, augmented data management. But the challenge is that a black box, I mean, everyone here is a data practitioner, right? And we all know that every machine learning algorithm is as good as the training data behind it. And the reality is that every data team is different, and every company is different, and every industry is different. And so it's very, very unlikely that a out-of-the-box machine learning algorithm is going to be able to automate context about all of your data. And so the one thing that we've learned is how do you build programmability into the way that you think about automation, right? So an out-of-the-box algorithm can take you 70% of the way, but if you open up that algorithm and actually allow people to make edits and changes and rules and algos on top of that, you can actually get to 95%, 100% in some cases to actually help drive more automation in the way that people think about context and trust on their data. Other examples, integrating directly into CI/CD pipelines. So as engineers are actually shipping data, software, you should be able to just auto-integrate into CI/CD pipelines right then and there to ensure that tests, documentation, all of that just flows in into a central repository. What you're seeing on the right is actually an example of standardized developer documentation. So a default, like almost like you, as a developer, there's actually a screen here which says, and it's not on the screen, but like it actually says data gotchas. All the things that if you worked on the data, you know that like when someone else is working on the data, they should probably know. And again, you can build standardized elements into this, into the way that you even think about your CI/CD, right? And finally, go from data governance to data ops. Now, what really is data ops and why is it important? So if you think about every other domain in our organization, they have a focused enablement function. Sales teams have sales ops and sales enablement. They're focused on improving the enablement and productivity and ramp time of the sales team. Developer teams have DevOps, and now we have companies like Netflix and Meta starting to experiment with developer productivity engineering, which are focused on improving collaboration between software teams and productivity of developers, right? Product ops, agile. Every other team in our organizations have a team that's focused, or a function that's focused on actually improving that function for everyone else. Why do we not have that as we think about data teams? Data ops is starting to emerge as a collaborative practice, which is really focused on that, right? Which is saying, hey, how do I take learnings from Lean and Agile and DevOps and bring it into the way that we work with data and that our data teams function inside organizations? Some of my favorite learnings, and I'm posing these as almost questions, because a lot of this, I think, as an industry, we're figuring out what really is data ops, how do we implement it. But some of my favorite learnings from some of these principles, right? Lean manufacturing is really centered around this concept that they call a value stream. And so the way that a value stream is defined is it basically says that every single thing that we do should create end user value. And everything in my process that is not creating end user value is waste. And how do you figure out how to eliminate waste in the process? So you think about all those times where you're responding to a Slack conversation as a data engineer, that's basically waste, right? So how do you think about everything in your process and start saying, how do you actually align to value and end users and minimize waste in your process? Agile, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm guessing a lot of people in the room are probably familiar with concepts, but like how do we go from shipping, how do we start thinking about shipping data products like we ship software products, right? And how do we ship fast and involve end users in implementation? And DevOps, DevOps became extremely popular because of previously software development teams and IT ops were completely siloed organizations. And so how do you start thinking about, again, going back to the concept of governance 3.0, how do you actually not think about governance as its own separate siloed function? How do you actually bring it into the daily work of teams and practitioners and the work that they're doing on a daily basis? And how should data ops teams be structured to make that happen? The way I've started thinking about data ops is that data ops enables the rest of the organization to be data-driven. As a function, it really has two stakeholders. The first is the data team and the data practitioners themselves. And there, the impact really is improved productivity of the data team, increased time to value and speed of delivery, reducing the ramp time of a new joinee, things like that. And the second stakeholder is actually the data consumer, right? Executives, business users, product managers, compliance, finance, where your goal is really to reduce those Slack conversations, right? Reduce dependencies on the data team and improve self-service so your data team can go on and do more valuable things inside the organization. One of my favorite examples of this in practice is the team at WeWork, which invested in a two-member data ops function in their org. And they actually had two very diverse, interesting skill sets that came together that made this team successful. So on one hand, you'll see Emily Lazio. Emily she studied information and library sciences. So she thinks structure in the way that she just thinks. Then she went on and she was a children's librarian. And so she's extroverted and she knows how to bring people together. And then she went on to be an information architect in WeWork's design team. And so she understands user research. And so she was incredibly valuable in helping the team understand their users and almost play that quasi-data platform product management role for the team. On the other hand, we had Yong, who was hardcore computer science, engineering lead, who just thinks patterns and thinks automation. And where we've seen teams fail is when you have only one of these two functions. And so what ends up happening is that you only think from an engineering perspective or you only think from a people perspective. But when these two skill sets come together, you're automating whatever's possible, wherever possible, and at the same time, you're actually engaging end users, thinking product first in your philosophy, right? And this two-member team can start impacting the productivity. So what we've started seeing as a structure is the rest of the org is almost built as data pods, right? So there are the data teams, sometimes there are data product managers that sit between the data team and the data consumers. Sometimes it could even just be someone in the data team playing that quasi role of the data product manager, and those are the data pods. And your data ops function is actually enabling this data pod significantly in the way that they do. So those are my four principles on the way I think data governance is starting to evolve and what data governance 3.0 era should really look like. I know some of these are more questions than answers, but I really hope that in the next year or two, we can come back to this conference and actually talk about what does the solution really look like. As we've made incredible progress in the data infrastructure layer, we're at a point in time where the next big delta for data organizations is going to come from data culture. And enabling data teams to start work more efficiently as we've gone from solving infrastructure problems and data stack problems to actually solving real human problems and enabling people to get value from data. And so that's basically all I had. I'm an entrepreneur, so I always end with a plug. Tomorrow, we're actually talking about what does some of this mean in practice. I'm the founder of a company called Atlin. We're a pioneer in what we think of as active metadata, which is about taking metadata, which traditionally used to be siloed in a data catalog tool or a data governance tool, and bring it back into the daily workflows, programmatic workflows, CI/CD pipelines that end users use every day. We were a launch partner with Unity Catalog just today. And tomorrow, I'll be joined by Todd, who's the product manager on the team at Databricks, to talk about what that product integration could really look like, how some of this could actually come alive, and make some of these principles, how we're attempting to make some of these principles come alive from a product and product perspective. So tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. So with that, I'm going to stop and open up the floor to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We do have 5 minutes, so any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for a really nice presentation, very engaging. I'm curious about the following. Basically, if I look at our company, we have, let's say, a data and analytics-oriented group who are very enthusiastic about data. And we've got, let's say, a more traditional process-centric ERP, CRM-oriented group. And currently, data governance as a topic in our company is driven by that second group, which is kind of the suits. How do we bring those worlds together?
That's a great question. I think a large part of it actually comes down to what is the purpose of data governance, right? And as you start thinking about that in today's world, some of the things that, like, we did not know we were building data governance. We were trying to make our team work better and actually just add value to the way that we work. That was the starting point for data governance. Data governance is not about, it's really not about process and policy as much as it's about building value for your data team and helping your data team work better together. Which is why we've started to see in a lot of organizations, data ops functions start getting adopted inside of the data organization itself, because it needs to be as close as possible to the data practitioners to actually make it work. The starting point for data governance cannot be, here's a compliance rule, let's follow it. The starting point for, because it'll never get adopted. Like I mean, historically, like, you know, data governance programs have been known to fail. I was talking to a consultant who implements pretty large data governance projects, and she was like, 60% of the projects I'm brought in to are projects that basically failed after someone bought like a really expensive tool, and 2.5 years later, they brought me in because it failed, and like, we have to go fix it. And the reason for that is you don't start from your users. And your users, in this case, are data practitioners. And data practitioners don't care about data governance. They care about their lives being better. And so that's why, like, we're starting to see a lot more of data ops functions starting to get embedded in data teams or data orgs itself. And yes, if you fix that and you get it right, you will solve for policy, you will solve for PII classification, you will solve for trust for data. So all those outcomes that data governance traditionally tried to solve for will get solved. But it essentially ends up being closer to data than necessarily process. So that's something that we've started seeing inside organizations. I hope that helps in terms of.
Yeah, it helps. I hope we can similarly, let's say, inspire our own colleagues. Thank you.
Tell me about how that goes.
Sure.
Any other questions? Cool. Sure. Prakulla, right? Yeah.
Prakalpa.
Yeah, the speaker will
I'll be around
stay
in
out
case you have any questions.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being an awesome audience. I hope this was helpful.